In the mid-18th century, along the eastern edge of North America, 13 British colonies stretched from New Hampshire to Georgia. They were not united. They were not independent. And they were not preparing for revolution. Yet within a single generation, these scattered colonies would challenge the most powerful empire in the world, and win. This is the story of how colonies became a nation. How protests became rebellion. And how revolution gave birth to the United States of America. The 13 colonies before revolution. By the 1750s, Britain controlled 13 colonies along the Atlantic coast. They were divided into 3 main regions. New England colonies, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Hampshire. These colonies focused on trade, fishing, shipbuilding, and small farms. Middle colonies, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware. Known for fertile land, grain production, and cultural diversity. Southern colonies, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia. Large plantations dominated the economy, relying heavily on enslaved labor. Each colony had a royal governor appointed by George III. However, colonists also elected their own local assemblies. For decades, Britain followed a policy known as salutary neglect, allowing colonies to govern themselves as long as trade remained profitable. Most colonists considered themselves British subjects. Revolution was not yet in their minds. But global conflict was about to change everything. The French and Indian War. In 1754, Britain and France went to war over territory in North America. This conflict became part of the global 7 Years' War. After nearly a decade of fighting, Britain emerged victorious. France lost most of its North American territory. But victory came at a cost. Britain was deeply in debt. And Parliament believed the colonies should help pay for the war that had protected them. This decision would ignite the flames of resistance. Taxation and colonial resistance. Beginning in 1764, Parliament passed new laws. The Sugar Act. The Stamp Act. The Townshend Acts. For the first time, Britain directly taxed the colonies to raise revenue. Colonists were outraged. They had no representatives in Parliament. Their slogan became famous. No taxation without representation. Groups like the Sons of Liberty formed to organize resistance. One of the most vocal leaders was Samuel Adams. Boycotts spread across the colonies. Merchants refused British goods. Tensions escalated further after the Boston Massacre in 1770, where British soldiers fired into a crowd. Trust between Britain and the colonies was collapsing. The Boston Tea Party. In 1773, Parliament passed the Tea Act. Although it lowered tea prices, it maintained Britain's right to tax the colonies. On December 16, 1773, colonists disguised as Native Americans boarded British ships and dumped 342 chests of tea into Boston Harbor. This protest became known as the Boston Tea Party. Britain responded with harsh punishment, the Intolerable Acts. The port of Boston was closed. Now, the colonies began to unite. The First Continental Congress and the start of war. In 1774, colonial representatives met in Philadelphia at the First Continental Congress. They still hoped for reconciliation. But in April 1775, fighting broke out at Lexington and Concord. The shot heard round the world marked the beginning of the Revolutionary War. Soon after, the Second Continental Congress appointed George Washington as commander of the Continental Army. Washington faced enormous challenges. An untrained army. Limited supplies. Powerful British forces. But the colonies were no longer protesting. They were fighting. The Declaration of Independence. By 1776, reconciliation was no longer possible. A committee led by Thomas Jefferson drafted a revolutionary document. On July 4, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was adopted. It declared that all men are created equal and possess unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This was not just political separation. It was a radical new philosophy of government, one based on the consent of the governed. Turning points and victory. The early years of the war were difficult for the Americans. But in 1777, victory at the Battle of Saratoga changed everything. France decided to officially support the American cause. French troops, money, and naval power dramatically shifted the balance. In 1781, British General Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown. In 1783, the Treaty of Paris formally recognized American independence. The colonies had defeated an empire, creating a new nation. Winning independence was only the beginning. The new nation faced enormous challenges: debt, weak central government, and political division. In 1787, delegates met at the Constitutional Convention to create a stronger framework of government. The United States Constitution established 3 branches of government and a system of checks and balances. In 1789, George Washington became the first president of the United States. A republic had been born. Conclusions. Conclusion. The American Revolution was more than a war. It was a transformation of ideas, about rights, representation, and liberty. What began as colonial protest became a global example of democratic revolution. And its impact continues to shape the modern world. If you found this video helpful in understanding early American history, consider subscribing for more in-depth historical documentaries. History is not just about the past. It explains the present. And it shapes the future. Subscribe and explore the untold history of America, the wars, the ideas, the people who shaped a nation. Watch my other videos and dive even deeper into the story.